You think you understand American high school? You think you've seen every teenage hierarchy? Well, I'm about to reveal the most brutal, unforgiving social ladder that shaped millions of American childhoods, and you probably never even realized it existed. For 30 minutes, twice a day, this yellow metal box became a ruthless kingdom with its own laws, its own royalty, and its own outcasts. And if you rode the bus in America, you were part of this system, whether you knew it or not. But here's what's really crazy. This hierarchy was so powerful that it could make or break your entire school experience. Kids would literally move houses, fake illnesses, or beg their parents for rides just to avoid their position on this ladder. 26 million American kids ride school buses every single day. That means 26 million kids navigate this invisible caste system that adults have completely forgotten about. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the back of the bus wasn't just a place to sit. It was a throne that could change your life. Let me show you something that will blow your mind. This isn't just a bus, it's a battlefield mapped out in seats. The front 5 rows? That's what I call the exile zone. If you sat here by choice, you were either in kindergarten or social suicide. These seats were for 3 types of kids: the babies, the outcasts, and the brown-nosers who actually wanted to talk to the bus driver. But here's the psychological warfare part. Sometimes popular kids would sit in the front just to mess with the system. It was like psychological terrorism. Everyone would be confused. Wait, is the front cool now? Did the rules change? The middle section, rows 6 through 10, this was the neutral zone. Safe, boring, forgettable. The Switzerland of school bus politics. You wouldn't get picked on, but you'd never rule anything either. But row 11 and back, that was the kingdom. And getting there, that's where our story really begins. Now, here's where it gets really dark. You couldn't just walk to the back of the bus. Oh no, there was an initiation process that would make fraternities jealous. Picture this. You're a 7th grader. You've been riding middle seats for 2 years. You think you're ready to level up, so one Monday morning you make your move. You walk past row 10, past row 11, and you sit in row 12. The silence that follows is deafening. Every eye on that bus is watching. The current backseat royalty is sizing you up like lions watching a gazelle drink from their watering hole. Now, what happens next determined your social fate for the next 4 years, and there were only 3 possible outcomes. Outcome 1, acceptance. They make room, maybe even slide over. Congratulations, you just got promoted to the ruling class. Outcome 2, the test. They don't say anything, but for the next week, they're watching everything you do. How you dress, who you talk to, how you react to their jokes. Pass the test, welcome to the kingdom. Fail it. Outcome 3, the rejection. And this is where it gets brutal. The rejection wasn't just go sit somewhere else. No, that would be too easy. The backseat mafia had perfected psychological warfare that would make the CIA proud. First came the freeze, complete social isolation. They'd talk around you, over you, through you, but never to you. You became invisible while being hypervisible at the same time. Then came the soundtrack of shame. They'd start commenting on everything about you, your clothes, your backpack, your hair, the way you breathed. But they'd never address you directly, just loud enough for you to hear, quiet enough to have plausible deniability if adults asked. But the cruelest part? They'd do it with smiles, laughing like it was all just fun and games. Because if you complained to the bus driver or your parents, you looked like the sensitive one who couldn't take a joke. I knew kids who would fake being sick for weeks just to avoid riding the bus after a failed backseat attempt. Some switched to walking to school. We're talking miles in the snow, rather than face that daily humiliation. And here's the really messed up part. This system was so effective that it created its own enforcers. Kids in the middle rows would actively prevent unworthy students from even attempting to sit in the back. They became border guards for a kingdom they didn't even belong to. But what made someone worthy of the back seats? The criteria was more complex than Harvard admissions and twice as arbitrary. Rule 1. Grade level supremacy. 8th graders ruled middle school buses. Seniors ruled high school buses. But here's the twist. A cool 7th grader could sometimes outrank a nerdy 8th grader. Social status could trump age. Rule 2, the athletic exception. Varsity athletes got automatic backseat privileges, even as underclassmen. The football team's water boy had more bus status than the valedictorian. Rule 3, the sibling legacy. If your older brother or sister was backseat royalty, you inherited their throne. But, and this is crucial, you could also inherit their enemies. Family feuds played out in vinyl seats and arguments over who controlled the emergency exit. Rule 4, the relationship clause. Dating someone from the back rows was your golden ticket. Break up with them, enjoy your walk back to the middle rows. But here's where it gets really interesting. Rule 5, the bus driver factor. The bus driver wasn't just transportation. They were the Supreme Court, the military dictator, and the wild card all rolled into one. Some drivers were complete pushovers. They'd put on headphones and let the kids run their own little Lord of the Flies experiment. These were the buses where the hierarchy was most brutal because there was no adult intervention. Other drivers were absolute dictators. Assigned seats, no talking, no music, no fun. These buses had no hierarchy because everyone was equally miserable under martial law. But the most interesting drivers? The strategic ones. They understood the social dynamics, and they played favorites. I'm talking about drivers who would accidentally brake check when the mean kids were standing up. Drivers who would turn up the radio when the quiet kid finally found the courage to talk. Drivers who could make or break your social status with something as simple as where they chose to enforce the no standing rule. Mrs. Henderson on Route 47 was legendary for this. She'd been driving the same route for 20 years, and she had opinions about which kids deserved to sit where. Cross Mrs. Henderson, and somehow your usual seat would always be saved for someone else. But here's the plot twist. Sometimes the bus driver would become obsessed with fixing the hierarchy. They'd force popular kids to sit in front, make outcasts sit in back, trying to engineer some kind of social justice. It never worked. You can't legislate popularity. But it created these weird alternate reality buses where the normal rules didn't apply, and everyone was constantly confused about their social standing. Now, here's something most adults never realized was happening. The back of the bus wasn't just about social status. It was about power. Real, tangible power. Backseat kids controlled information. They knew who was dating whom, who was having family problems, who was getting in trouble at school. They were basically the CIA of adolescent intelligence. They controlled contraband, gum, candy, Game Boys, later on iPods and phones. If it was against school rules, it flowed through the backseat economy. They controlled protection. Getting picked on by an 8th grader, better hope you had connections in the back rows. Getting your lunch money stolen, backseat kids could make that stop for a price. And sometimes they controlled much darker things. I'm talking about the buses where backseat kids were dealing drugs, organizing fights, running gambling rings, even orchestrating cheating schemes for tests. The back of bus Route 23 in my district was basically a criminal enterprise run by 14-year-olds. They had lookouts, they had territories, they had consequences for snitches that would make the mafia proud. And the craziest part? Teachers and administrators had no idea. To them, it was just kids being kids on the bus. They had no clue they were looking at the training ground for future organized crime. But nothing, and I mean nothing, shook up the bus hierarchy quite like teenage romance. Sitting together on the bus was basically equivalent to getting married in middle school terms. It was a public declaration that changed everything. Picture this. Jessica, back row royalty since 6th grade, starts dating Mike from row 8. Suddenly, Mike has unlimited back row access. But what happens to his best friend Tom, who's been sitting in row 8 their whole lives? Does Tom get promoted too, or does he become collateral damage in teenage love? I watched entire bus hierarchies crumble because of relationships. The Great Bus 12 Civil War of 2003 started because Sarah, the unofficial queen of the back row, broke up with Kevin and immediately started dating his younger brother Danny. Kevin's faction said Danny could never sit in the back. He was grade level ineligible and dating the ex was treason. Sarah's faction said love conquers all and Danny had diplomatic immunity. This wasn't just drama. This was Game of Thrones with backpacks. Alliances formed, betrayals happened, people switched buses to avoid the conflict. Parents got involved. The bus route got changed because too many kids were asking for transfers. And through it all, Danny and Sarah lasted exactly 3 weeks, but the social fallout lasted until graduation. What goes up must come down, and backseat royalty could fall faster than the stock market in 2008. Sometimes it was gradual. You'd start noticing people talk to you a little less, included you a little less, until one day you realized you were sitting alone while everyone else clustered at the other end of the seat. Sometimes it was sudden and brutal. One embarrassing moment, one wrong joke, one social miscalculation, and you'd find your throne had been given to someone else overnight. But the most devastating falls were the ones that came from outside the bus entirely. Picture being the king of bus route 15, then getting caught cheating on a test and having it announced over the school intercom. Your backseat status didn't just disappear, it became social poison. Kids who used to fight for your approval suddenly acted like they'd never met you. Or imagine being back row royalty, then showing up to school in the same outfit as the school's biggest outcast. Suddenly everyone's wondering, if they shop at the same places, are they really better than us? The paranoia was real. Backseat kids would sometimes sabotage each other just to maintain their position, spread rumors, steal phones, orchestrate embarrassing situations, anything to ensure they stayed on top. Because here's the thing about artificial hierarchies, they require constant maintenance. Miss a day of school, and you might come back to find your seat taken and your status revoked. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, what this actually did to kids psychologically. For the winners, it created a false sense of superiority based on nothing but arbitrary social positioning. These kids learned that power came from exclusion, that status required someone else to be beneath you. For the losers, it created deep insecurities that lasted decades. I know adults in their 40s who still feel anxiety when they walk to the back of any bus or theater because of trauma from middle school bus hierarchies. But here's what's really messed up. It taught all of us that social systems were natural and unchangeable, that some people just deserved to be on top and others deserved to be on the bottom. Think about it. For millions of American kids, their first real experience with power dynamics, with social stratification, with systemic inequality happened on a school bus. And the lesson was, this is just how the world works. No wonder so many Americans struggle with questioning authority or challenging unfair systems. We literally trained them from childhood that hierarchies are natural and rebellion is social suicide. The school bus wasn't just transportation, it was indoctrination. We were learning how to be good little citizens in an unequal society, one vinyl seat at a time. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. What happened when technology invaded the school bus? First came portable CD players and Game Boys. Suddenly, backseat status wasn't just about personality and social connections. It was about who had the coolest toys. Then came cell phones. Group chats meant backseat politics didn't end when you got off the bus. They continued 24/7. The hierarchy became inescapable. Social media made everything worse. Now your bus status could be documented and shared with the entire school. Snapchat stories of backseat parties that middle-row kids weren't invited to. Instagram posts that made it clear who was in and who was out. But COVID changed everything. Suddenly buses were running at half capacity. Assigned seats based on address, not social status. Masks meant you couldn't use facial expressions for social signaling. The entire system that had existed for decades was suddenly gone. Kids who came back to school after COVID had to rebuild the hierarchy from scratch. But something interesting happened. A lot of them just didn't. Without the physical space to establish dominance, without the daily routine of territorial claims, the bus hierarchy started to fade. Some buses became more egalitarian. Others developed entirely new social systems based on different criteria. And some kids, having experienced life without constant social pressure, decided they liked it better that way. So why am I telling you all this? Why does a seemingly silly story about where kids sat on a bus actually matter? Because the school bus hierarchy was never just about the bus. It was a training ground for every social system these kids would encounter for the rest of their lives. Corporate hierarchies, social clubs, online communities, even family dynamics. All of these follow the same basic patterns we learned on the school bus. The kids who learned to work within unfair systems became adults who accepted unfair systems. The kids who learned that power comes from exclusion became adults who excluded others to feel powerful. The kids who learned that questioning the hierarchy led to punishment became adults who never questioned authority. But here's the hopeful part. The kids who learned to see through the bullshit, who recognized that the emperor had no clothes, who understood that these hierarchies were artificial and changeable. They became the adults who fight for justice, who challenge unfair systems, who work to make the world more equitable. Every civil rights leader, every social reformer, every person who's ever stood up and said, "This isn't fair," they all had to start somewhere. And for millions of Americans, that somewhere was looking at the back of a school bus and deciding they didn't want to play that game anymore. I want to take a moment to speak directly to anyone watching this who rode the bus as a kid. If you were backseat royalty, if you held power in that little yellow kingdom, I want you to think about how you used that power. Did you lift others up or tear them down? Did you use your influence to protect the vulnerable or to maintain your position at their expense? If you were middle row Switzerland, if you played it safe and stayed invisible, I want you to consider the cost of that safety. What opportunities did you miss because you were too afraid to rock the boat? What injustices did you witness but choose to ignore? And if you were front row exile, if you were excluded, humiliated, or forgotten, I want you to know that your worth was never determined by where you sat on a bus. The system that rejected you was broken, not you. But most importantly, I want all of you to recognize that these patterns didn't end when you graduated. They followed you into college, into your career, into your relationships, into your parenting. The question is, are you still playing by the rules you learned on the school bus, or have you figured out how to write new ones? Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to think about your current life, your workplace, your friend group, your community. Where do you see school bus hierarchies playing out? Who's sitting in the back row of your office? Who's being relegated to the front seats in your social circle? And most importantly, what are you going to do about it? Because here's the thing, we can't change what happened on those buses, but we can change what happens next. If you have kids, pay attention to their bus stories. If they're struggling with hierarchy and social pressure, help them understand that these systems aren't natural law. They're choices we make as a society. If you're in a position of power, at work, in your community, in your family, remember that your actions shape other people's experience of hierarchy. You can choose to be the person who lifts others up rather than keeping them down. And if you're still feeling the effects of those childhood experiences, if you're still hearing the voices that told you where you belonged, remember, you get to choose your own seat now. The American school bus was more than transportation. It was education. It taught us about power, about belonging, about human nature itself. Some of those lessons were valuable. We learned resilience, social intelligence, how to navigate complex group dynamics. But some of those lessons were toxic. We learned that inequality was natural, that exclusion was acceptable, that might made right. The generation that grew up after COVID might be the first to break this cycle. They're creating new rules, new systems, new ways of being together that don't require someone else to be beneath them. And maybe, just maybe, they'll teach the rest of us how to build a world where everyone gets to sit wherever they want. What seat are you choosing today?